Arcsan is now digital.ai. Join us at our booth in the virtual expo hall to learn how our app protection, white box cryptography, and threat analytics solutions can help you stay ahead of the evolving threat landscape.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ido Safruti, co-founder and CTO at Perimeter X, and with me is Ameet Naik, security evangelist with us. And we're going to talk today about Magecart in 2020, and which is, as we call it here, the new face of XSS or cross-site scripting and the new vulnerabilities and attack vector there. Perimeter X is a web application security company, and we're doing a lot of research around all kind of application abuse, and Magecart is a major phenomena that we're researching to protect our customer. And to start with, what is Magecart? Obviously, I assume everyone here on this audience heard it to one extent, to a certain extent. Magecart in general is a aggregated term for a type of attack that is a group of different threats operated by multiple organizations that are typically targeting client-side application, client-side browser to practice digital skimming, or also known as form jacking, and think about it as getting some code into the application that runs on the browser side that helps them acquire and collect information about the visitors. The type of information that they typically care about is all kind of personal data, things that are valuable for them. The most common use case is any payment information, most commonly credit card information or other payment related information that they can then collect and leverage in other places. And we've seen victims of that in the last couple of years across multiple retail, travel, and other brands, including even foundations and nonprofits like cancer foundations and other benefits, even recently for Corona aid and things like this, wherever a site has a forum that can collect information, it obviously becomes a target for these kind of skimmers. Some famous attacks were recently on Macy's. British Airways got a very hyped attack and got a lot of PR around it because of the hefty fine that GDPR taxed them for losing personal information. So it's not only breaching potential data and causing actual damage, there is an additional fine that can be on top of that. Magecart, also, just going to the origin of the name, is originally starting from Magento. So Magento is a very common platform, and when you go back to the original attacks that were dubbed Magecart, it initially was a combination of the word Magento and shopping cart, because this is where the initial attack started. We're trying to target the shopping cart activity on Magento stores, an extremely popular platform for retail. But obviously, most of the recent Magecart attacks are not only focused on Magento or Magento-like platforms, but are targeting any website. And why is this seeing such a huge rise in the last few years? What we're seeing is attackers are targeting that because the way web is built, the web of applications are built, the way businesses are operating evolved dramatically in the last few years. So we're seeing 10x more website than a decade ago. Obviously, everyone here knows that the web is growing. More and more businesses is going through digital transformation. Much more developers are building and building code there, which is opening more exposure. And more code is being transferred to the front end from the back end. So a lot of the logic from thin application and heavy on the back end, more and more applications are moving to fast clients, being it mobile or single application or dynamic code, where most of the logic is running as a code on the client side, rendering and collecting information via APIs. And when looking at all this transition and increase of code on the front end, it's also obvious to see that more than 70% of the website front end code is not actually code that was generated by the developers themselves, but a lot of it is third-party open source libraries, partners, third-party vendors that are providing services. Think of Google Analytics, for instance, ads, checkout, customer support, a lot of modules that you include by embedding some third-party code there. And all this change is presenting, obviously, for attacker an interesting vertical to target. And that this entire shift is also presenting what we call as a client-side shadow code. And what is this client-side shadow code that we're saying? Basically, part of the challenges when you're looking at so much code that is running on the front end is that JavaScript code is statically added. You include some snippet of code on the main HTML page that you embed it once, but then you are dynamically loading the JavaScript in the browser, and the JavaScript itself may change when you are including a tag for Google Analytics, for instance, as the example before. You include it once. As Google are rolling out new versions for Google Analytics, you don't need to change your site. The updated script is automatically being loaded there. Another aspect is that because all this logic is happening on the browser and all this code is running and rendered, and the elements that it brings and fetches are running on the browser side, the website owners, if you're owning a website that is having a lot of capabilities or JavaScript capabilities, you have no visibility on what actually is happening on the client side. So if a new script is now being modified, or if a third-party vendor was breached and is loading a different script or a vulnerable script, you on your data center and all your security tools that you have on your own data center, you are completely blind to that, because all that is being rendered and achieved on the client side. And obviously these two things are a very good foundation and very attractive assets for attackers to go after. This is where they can be in the shadows and act and operate for a long period of time, and in a potentially much easier way than actually tapping into your highly secured data center. If they can collect information from the users versus from your database, why should they hack into the database versus doing that? And this is the trend and the shift and the opportunity that all these shifts in the last days is presenting. And to learn more about how they're doing that, I'll hand it over to Ameet to walk through some of the recent attacks, some of the analysis that we're doing, and some of the potential risks to be aware of.
Thank you, Ido. So we looked at what is the Magecart problem and why it affects modern web applications. For the rest of the talk, we want to take a look at how do these attacks actually enter a typical website, and what are the different injection techniques, what makes it really hard and complex to detect. We'll look at a case study and a couple examples of actual attacks that our research team has uncovered in the wild, and then wrap it up with some best practices recommendations on how website owners can mitigate and prevent these types of attacks. So if you look at injection techniques, there are a few different ways that Magecart attacks can infect a website. And the first, of course, common approach is a traditional compromise of the first-party infrastructure, right? So this could be, through a brute force attack on the infrastructure somewhere on the development cycle that can insert a snippet or change a snippet or change a script directive to load potentially unknown code or shadow code onto the web application itself. And this can also be done by taking over by carrying out cross-site scripting attacks against the infrastructure and getting access to the backend database and credentials and so on. But another more common approach we're seeing more and more right now is the use of cloud storage. S3 buckets, get the brunt of this, but this has also been found on other cloud providers' storage services. And what we're finding is that security controls and permissions on S3 buckets are often not up to par. And they are, hackers are constantly scanning S3 buckets on the internet to find ones where they have write access. And when they do find one where they have with weak permissions, where they have write access that's potentially hosting web JavaScript for web, they can go in and modify it and insert malicious code in the JavaScript. And then, when that script phones home to a command and control server, they know what targets they've acquired that way. Right. So this is a common first-party attack technique that we're seeing on web applications. But the other way to insert malicious code into web apps is open source libraries. So as you know, most modern development makes extensive use of open source libraries, both for in-house applications as well as customer-facing web applications. And this enables a level of innovation and a pace of innovation that is really beneficial to the industry as a whole. But this comes with a few problems. With open source libraries that are in repositories online, you often don't know who all have commit access, right? So it's by definition, they're community projects, and you have large numbers of people that have access to make changes to these libraries, which is a good thing because bugs get resolved really quickly. But the downside of that is you don't know what vulnerabilities may get introduced. There may be insider threats. There may be there's more weight. The attack surface is a lot larger. And another problem with open source libraries is, of course, zero-day vulnerabilities that may exist in the code that somebody can discover and exploit. And that's another way that malicious code can enter a web application. And then, of course, there are always account takeover attempts of people who have commit access or have permissions to change things in the open source library. And that's also abused extensively to carry these out. And then the third attack, the injection technique, is third-party attacks on third-party script providers. So this is, like Ido mentioned, we're finding about 70% of code on a typical web application is third-party. And this actually represents a really large attack surface for many third-party attacks. And again, like with first party, it's going to use similar techniques like cross-site scripting or looking for exposed S3 buckets. Or another common approach is plugins that are used in common content management systems. WordPress is notorious for this. There's almost a vulnerability announced every month and something discovered in a plugin. And version control and version management is generally not well regulated with these plugins. So this becomes a weak point for many web applications and e-commerce sites and customer-facing sites. And now this represents a really large attack surface, and this is also an attractive target for attackers because by taking over one service that is used by thousands of different sites, they can actually get a much bigger yield. And a great example of this is, a couple of months ago, a leading communications provider published a vulnerability that one of their most commonly used scripts was actually on an S3 bucket with wrong permissions, and a known Magecart gang was able to modify it. And this malicious code actually made its way into thousands of different websites. Thankfully, it was discovered and fixed before it caused any known harm. But this is a great example of how, by attacking a single service, a Magecart attacker can get access to thousands and thousands of websites and millions of user records. So the one thing we see with Magecart attacks is they tend to last for a really long time. They evade detection, and they typically when the vulnerability is discovered and you do the security analysis, you find out that it's been running for several months or several weeks, and it has escaped detection for a long time. And part of the reason is, like Ido mentioned, this code is running on the client side, where the website owner is typically don't have full visibility into what's going on there. And it's also very dynamic. So what actually loads when a user loads a website, what loads on the browser, what loads on my browser may be very different than what loads on Ido's browser or your browser, based on certain conditions and criteria, and where we are, what types of devices we're using, and certain other logic that's present in these apps. So it's a challenging problem to detect, and a fairly complex threat. And to make things worse, we're dealing with a few other sort of layers of obscurity. Like, for example, a lot of Magecart is obfuscated code. It's obfuscated JavaScript. So a visual inspection will not reveal what it's doing. And obfuscating JavaScript for web applications is not just it's used legitimately as well, as a way of preserving integrity and hiding intellectual property. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but that just creates room for malware to lurk as well. And it's not straightforward to determine what this code is doing just by looking at the source. The other common attack technique we see is through lookalike malicious domains. So we've seen a lot of incidents where a commonly used service, so let's say Google Analytics as an example, a hacker might register a lookalike domain, and they'll change one character, for example. So they've changed the I here to the I with the caret, with an accent. And this is an entirely different name by if you look at the Unicode, this is a different name. And the way DNS rules work right now, for better or for worse, identities can be hidden. So it's really hard to go verify who actually owns this and whether that the owner is up to no good. And by doing this, what hackers can do is they can modify commonly used scripts in a page like Google Analytics, right, which is used to gather stats on most websites, and they can change this, and they can actually load a malicious version of Google Analytics from a domain that they control. And that malicious script can then load other malicious scripts as well, and start scraping or start taking over content from the website. The other thing we see a lot of is tripwires and evasion mechanisms, which are used to to evade analysts. So we've seen cases where the malicious code, where the code that's been injected actually has logic that says, what's the browser window size? Is the window size such that DevTools might be open? And if it suspects that DevTools is open on Chrome, then it will not load the malicious piece. It'll load a clean version of the script, and everything looks normal. But if it's coming from like an AWS source IP address, it will not load the malicious script, which could indicate a scanner, or it could indicate some attempt to analyze the page. We've seen really innovative exfiltration techniques as well. The most common ones are an XHR post, but we've seen also the use of steganography, which is hiding data in image requests, or hiding malicious code in images. And these are some of the ways the exfiltration of the data actually can be masked as well. So it's a fairly complex threat even for advanced security analysts to detect and analyze. So having said that, let's take a look at a couple examples. So this first one here is a fashion retailer out of France that was compromised. This is from about a little under a year ago. And what we found here is really interesting. So the way the malicious skimmer script was loaded was through many levels of indirection. So it's a multi-stage attack. And in the first stage, what we found was, of course, the websites, the attackers gain access to the website, and they were able to get to a point where they can insert or modify the source code. And what they did is they placed a malicious loader that looked on the surface like Google Analytics, right? So it looked like Google Analytics, a tag manager, and it actually was inserted inline into the source code, but it actually loaded the script from a domain that was controlled by the hackers. And this tag manager loaded another script, and the domain name for the script was actually encoded in this string that you see here. So by visual inspection, you couldn't tell that they were loading something from a malicious domain. You'd have to reverse the hash here and update this URL, which is where the malicious script was loaded from. But this was not actually the skimmer. So this script then in turn loaded yet another script, which was the actual skimmer. And this is also loaded from the same domain. And this is a script that started sniffing credit card information and other personal data on the checkout page for this website and transmitting it back to the command and control server, which was magento.info. And again, this was a domain registered by the hackers for the purpose of carrying out this attack. But if you look just visual inspection of the source code, this domain doesn't show up anywhere. So it's really hard to just catch these types of attacks by source code inspection through cursory scanning or through kind of advanced analysis, right? You have to kind of reverse engineer the multiple layers of scripts to figure out what they're doing and what the negative impact of these scripts might be. And this is why this problem is really hard to detect and solve, because unless you have kind of some runtime signals that tell you what the page is actually doing, it's just hard to detect and stop this kind of attack. I want to talk a little bit about the inter-skimmer. So this has been talked about quite a bit. And this is a skimming toolkit that has been sold and used on the wild for over 12 months now. And this toolkit actually is a way to take the complexity out of Magecart attacks, and it makes Magecart attacks accessible to even novice hackers. They don't need to know the nuances and the details. It's very, very customizable, and you can choose what you want to do with it. You can choose from different exfiltration techniques using the skimmer. And one of the most common uses of the skimmer we find is creating fake checkout forms. So what hackers are ultimately after stealing, after payment card information. And many checkout forms will use iframes to kind of mask that information from other scripts on the page. And so to get around that problem, what we see hackers doing is they'll modify a page before that, so like the product browsing page or the shopping cart page. And by modifying the DOM, the document object model, they can insert a button that looks like a checkout button. The user doesn't know. The user clicks on it, and they actually get taken to a fake checkout page, which is actually controlled by the hacker. And this checkout page will inherit all the style, the CSS, the style sheets from the main page. So it has similar look and feel, similar font, similar structure. But now this page is entirely controlled by the hackers. And when you type in your personal information, your credit card information, and hit submit, nothing happens. Nothing happens because all this page is able to do is actually post that information to the command and control server. And from there, that information is harvested and then sold on the dark web. But the user experience is a little bit marred because the first time it fails, and then they might go back and they might try to check out again, and this time they'll get the correct form and they'll be able to complete the transaction. But this still provides a little bit of a clue to the user if they're informed, if they're educated. They can sense that maybe something was wrong. They can open a ticket with the vendor and say, hey, I suspected something, there might have been a skimmer on this page and had this strange experience. And that can alert the website owners to the existence of this toolkit, and they can take steps to stop it. So we've seen a lot of we've seen still, a lot of successful hacks using the inter-skimmer. and using these fake checkout forms. And this continues to be a really popular toolkit. Recently, we've even seen Inter being offered as a service, where the writers of this toolkit will do all the hard work for you, and they'll just do a revenue share, and you get a portion of the proceeds from selling the credit card numbers. They keep a portion, and they just make it really easy and accessible. So it's kind of a bit of a democratization of Magecart skimming toolkits. But we still have this problem that they are not able. There is a clue to the user that something wrong happened, and this is the problem that Magecart attackers have been trying to solve. And here's an example of how they solved it without having to go through the fake checkout path. So the ultimate holy grail for Magecart attackers is the payment script, and they've been looking for ways to actually compromise payment scripts so that they don't have to do the fake checkout, they don't have to alter the user path, but they can get a copy of the credit card data while the user is successfully carrying out a transaction. And here's an example of an attack that the Perimeter X research team discovered that was on Braintree, which is the PayPal payment service that's used as a payment gateway for many e-commerce sites. And very often, e-commerce retailers will use a PCI compliant payment provider like Braintree, and a good day, all this data is partitioned within an iframe. The retailer doesn't have access to it, so they're able to comply with PCI regulations and attestations that they're not storing the credit card information anywhere on this site. It's all handled by Braintree, and they're able to kind of offload a bit of that responsibility. But the key takeaway here is that doesn't necessarily guarantee data privacy. So here's an example where hackers were actually able to, first they gain access to the site, and they modified the source for the page. And instead of calling the usual URL braintreegateway.com and loading the script from there, they loaded the script from a fake domain that they control called braintreegateway24.com. And what's interesting is that they were able to bypass all of the validation and all the client-side validation, and using this altered version of the script, they're actually able to run successful payment transactions. And this is really interesting because you have a situation where you have modified client-side script, and Braintree is accepting requests from that and concluding successful transactions. But this modified script also sends a copy of the credit card to the command and control server hosted by the hackers. And this is the problem because users have no indication that anything wrong happened. This doesn't show up anywhere on the server logs. So the website owner has no indication that this happened, and Braintree has no indication that this happened because they're receiving transaction requests like they normally would from their own script, and there's no without looking at the endpoint, the client side behavior, it's really hard to detect something like this and stop it, because this is all running within an iframe. It's following all the security best practices. It's meeting PCI compliance objectives, but your data is getting skimmed at the same time. So this was another interesting attack that Magecart attackers are after, and they're replicating this across other payment services as well. And there's a detailed analysis of this incident on the Perimeter X blog, which you can take a look at, and it just walks through all the different steps in this attack and how it transpired. So we looked at the client side blindside problem. We looked at kind of how shadow code gets into the website. Some examples of how Magecart attacks affect web applications. What can we do to actually prevent this? So there are a few sort of best practices you can follow to control this problem. So first of all, protecting your web infrastructure is just sort of a baseline for any web application security posture. So make sure you're using web application firewalls to protect against more of the traditional cross-site scripting attacks. Make sure you're using strong admin passwords and multi-factor authentication to make sure that even if an admin account gets compromised, the MFA will prevent hackers from getting in. Make sure all your, if you're using a CMS, third-party CMS or third-party platform, make sure all your plugins are properly vetted, and make sure you apply all of the security patches on time. This is just basic security hygiene that you can use to protect your infrastructure. And in addition, secure your development processes for first-party scripts. So make sure you're doing security audits early on, analyzing open source libraries for vulnerabilities early in the cycle. So whatever gets out into the staging and production environment is clean. Can at least control that. You can, but like Ido mentioned in the beginning, this only protects a small portion of the scripts that you have out there. You have about 70% third-party scripts. How do you protect against those and potential attacks on the third-party scripts? So there are some techniques you can use, like content security policies. So CSP is a really useful solution to this problem, because CSP lets you enforce policies on the browser. So if you're familiar with CSP, it's a set of directives that the site can send down to the browser that then restrict what domains it can load scripts from. It restricts what domains the site can communicate with, and what what code it can run, and where it can write to. So CSP rules are really useful, and but they're not entirely sufficient for a couple of reasons. So CSPs are hard to manage because they have to be maintained, right? So if you're deploying a site, you need to know in advance what all the different domains are that all of your third parties are communicating with. You need to have a change management process in place so that when the domains change, they can the policy can be modified. And if you don't do that, regularly, then you end up with broken site functionality and a poor user experience, which is sort of difficult to palate for most organizations. So this becomes there's definitely a maintenance issue for CSP. And then the other thing to keep in mind is CSP is not going to protect you against first-party compromises. So if there is a known set of hosts that are allowed under the CSP rules, those are yours. Could be a vendor that you really trust and you have a tight relationship with. And if those are allowed, then the hackers are just going to seek to compromise those hosts in order to insert malware into your website. And then, so CSPs are useful, but along with that, I think what's really useful is visibility from the client side as to what the scripts are actually doing. So there's solutions available like from Perimeter X that help you monitor the client side of your application and collect signals from your users' browsers in real time. And these solutions can baseline the behavior, what normal looks like. They can flag any anomalies. So if a script a third-party script suddenly starts communicating with a known malicious domain, that's anomalous behavior that can be flagged, that can raise alarm on. And then you can actually use content security policies to stop that communication, to mitigate that behavior without crippling the site functionality, without damaging the good actions that your scripts are doing as well. So, Magecart attacks have grown in size and scope, but definitely the solutions to solve and address them are here as well. It's a difficult problem because of the traditional client-side blind side, but by having visibility into what's going on in the client side can really get this problem under control. And with that, thank you for joining us here at the Global AppSec. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, and happy to discuss further.